thank you so much, Melanie, for coming here and then talk to us. And then we are a big fan of your work. You cannot imagine how
thank you.
Who you are, and you to have this opportunity to talk to you. And then here I'm going to start talking about the first questions that you are going to ask you is about Brazil is the country with the largest number of veterinarians worldwide and has a considerable part of its economy based on activities related to animal exploitation. How does cognitive play a role in activities that are associated with food production and pet industry?
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, thank you again for having me and for your efforts organizing this course. I'm so happy to be talking to you about this such an important subject, and it's so important for veterinarians in particular and veterinary students to be having this conversation. Some of the most important people in the whole world when it comes to making a better world for animals, veterinarians, veterinary teachers and institutions, veterinary students are really, really critical to this conversation. So let's start out and just talk about cognitive dissonance a little bit. So cognitive dissonance, for people who are not totally familiar with that concept, is the internal discomfort we feel when our values are not in alignment with our behaviors. So if we value compassion, caring, if we value fairness and justice, but we're treating people, we're acting in a way that are contradictory to that, then we're going to experience this internal discomfort. It's usually a moral discomfort that we feel. And people feel cognitive dissonance all the time. It's a normal experience because nobody lives perfectly in alignment with their values all the time, right? However, there are some areas of life where cognitive dissonance is really significant and where it really matters that we pay attention to it. And when it comes to our treatment of animals, this is one of those areas. Now, cognitive dissonance is uncomfortable for us, and so psychologically and emotionally, and so we naturally seek to alleviate this discomfort. And the way that people typically alleviate the discomfort is by doing one of three things. We can either change our values so that they match our behaviors. So for example, we can say, well, I believe in compassion and I believe in fairness, but I'm not treating these animals in a compassionate way. I'm not treating them the way I would want to be treated. So I'll just change my values. But research shows that people don't change their values like that. Nobody wants to say, okay, I just am not a compassionate person, I'm cruel. So people usually don't change their values. So the other option we have is to change our behaviors so that they match our values. So let's talk about eating animals as one example, okay? Most people eat animals, and veterinarians included, and most people care about animals and would never want to cause them to suffer when that suffering and harm is completely unnecessary, right? So people can say, well, I'm going to change my values. I'm just not going to say I'm a compassionate person toward animals. Well, nobody does that really. Studies show this. Or they can change their behaviors. They can become vegan. But many, many people don't become vegan. So there's a third option. The third option is that we change our perception of our behaviors so that when we eat animals, for example, we don't recognize that we're acting against our values. So this is the way we manage cognitive dissonance, if that makes sense. And this is the way it gets played out in general, just in the world, in the food industry, and also in the pet industry. It's the same thing. We change our perceptions of our behaviors so that we don't recognize our behaviors as contradictory with our values. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So what happens is that, my work has focused on the psychology of eating animals. And this work can be extended more broadly to the psychology of treating animals in a way that harms them. So I'm going to just talk about the psychology of eating animals right now to give an example, to explain what I'm talking about. So I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the psychology of eating animals, on what I discovered in my research. I discovered carnism, what I came to call carnism, the invisible ideology or belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals. Now, carnism, I'll just quickly explain what this is, for people who are not familiar with this. To understand carnism, everybody watching this and listening to this, I want you to do a little thought experiment. I'd like you to imagine that you're biting into a juicy hamburger and your dining companion turns to you and says, you know what? That hamburger is not made from beef. It's made from golden retrievers. Now, chances are your experience of the hamburger would dramatically changes, even though nothing about the hamburger itself changes. It's exactly the same. What changed was just your perception. So so for example, what you just thought of as food, you now think of as a dead animal. What you just felt was delicious, you now feel is disgusting. And so instead of continuing to eat the hamburger, you probably want to throw it away in the trash and maybe even take to the streets and protest. That is because of carnism. Carnism, the invisible belief system that conditions us to eat certain animals, distorts our perceptions of those animals we learn to classify as edible. So in Brazil, in many places in the West, for example, we're talking about chickens, pigs, cows, fish, etc. So when we look at their flesh, we don't see a dead animal. We see food. We don't feel our natural empathy. We don't feel anything. And so we end up supporting an industry that slaughters more animals in one day globally than the total number of people killed in all wars throughout history. We end up supporting this industry that is so cruel, it is so brutal, it's a leading cause of environmental destruction, including climate change, and a leading cause of human health problems without even realizing what we're doing. We're conditioned to just not think and not feel when it comes to eating animals. And the same thing happens to us on a broader level when it comes to our treatment of, harmful treatment of animals more broadly, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but I want to just pause here and make sure that this answers some of the question that you were asking me.
I mute myself only to just disturb you an audio.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the explanations. It's very important to explain all these terms, because for some people, I think for the majority of people in Brazil, especially veterinarians, we know that this exists, but you don't have all these names. It's so important to name all these processes, all these important things that I think everybody went through. And then I think in veterinary medicine, is so abrupt. This is absurd because most of people, you choose to be veterinarians because you love animals. And afterwards, you start considering that that's okay to eat some of that. Why?
Well, I mean, this is really important what you bring up. So veterinarians are people, and people in cultures all around the world, in mediating cultures all around the world, we learn to classify certain animals as edible. All the rest we classify as inedible. We only classify a small handful of animals as edible, and all the rest we classify as inedible. And we perceive their flesh as disgusting and often morally offensive to consume. So even though the type of species consumed changes from culture to culture, members of all cultures tend to think of their own choices as rational, and the choices of other cultures as irrational and disgusting and often even morally offensive. So we'll talk specifically about what this means for veterinarians in a minute, but I want to talk a little bit more about the system that is carnism and how it affects all of us, veterinarians and non-veterinarians alike. Now, carnism it's essentially the opposite of veganism. We tend to assume that only vegans or vegetarians follow a belief system. But the only reason we learn to eat pigs, but not dogs, for example, is because we do follow a belief system when it comes to eating animals. When eating animals is not a necessity, which is true for many people in the world today, then it's a choice. And choices always stem from beliefs, but we don't see this belief because it's invisible. This is because carnism is a special kind of belief system. It's what's called a dominant belief system. That means that it is so widespread that its tenets, its teachings are literally woven through the structure of society to shape norms, laws, beliefs, behaviors, etc. It becomes institutionalized, embraced and maintained by all major social institutions. So when we study nutrition, for example, we study carnistic nutrition. When we study medicine, we study carnistic medicine and carnistic veterinary medicine as well. The bias is so widespread that we don't even see it as a bias. Just like in the past, we've studied heterosexist psychology, for example. And in some places today, they still do. So when we are born into this dominant system, we inevitably learn to look at the world through the lens of the system. We internalize it. And carnism is not just dominant, it's also violent. It's organized around violence toward animals, and it runs counter to our core values. As I said earlier, most people, especially veterinarians, would never willingly support such violence, and yet they do. And so what carnism does is it uses psychological defense mechanisms. These defense mechanisms distort our perceptions and disconnect us from our natural empathy for animals so that we act against our values without even realizing what we're doing. So people want to become veterinarians. Usually it's because they care about animals, but they were already born into this carnistic system, this carnistic mentality. So it's normal for them to compartmentalize. Some animals we take care of, other animals we eat.
Thank you so much. I think you just answered the second questions that is about how this influence our social role of the veterinarians. And then thank you so much. It's I can see this. It's when I read your book, and then when I saw all the lectures that you have in a social media, I can see this. It's very clear, and then I hope the other ones can see this and then have names for all these processes. And then now I'm going to the third questions. We know that medical veterinary students go through a process of psychic numbing towards humans and other animals. Could you talk about how this process works?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, carnism uses these psychological defense mechanisms, right? And so I'll give an example of some of these defense mechanisms, okay? One defense mechanism is de-individualization. The name doesn't matter, but we learn to think of farmed animals as lacking any individuality, any personality of their own. So we learn to believe, for example, that a pig is a pig and all pigs are the same. We also learn to think of farmed animals as objects, so that when we look at the chicken on our dinner plate, for example, we refer to the chicken as something rather than someone. These are distancing mechanisms. We also learn to justify eating animals. We use the defense mechanism justification. There's a huge mythology surrounding eating animals, but all of these myths fall under what I refer to as the 3 N's of justification. We learn to believe that eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. And of course, these same myths have been used throughout human history to justify violent practices and atrocities from male dominance to heterosexual supremacy.
Thank you again, Melanie. Thank you. I'm enjoying so much to hear you. It's such a pleasure to have this opportunity. Now I'm going to the fourth question that you have here. could you point out the implications of psych-numbing, especially for students and professionals in the field of veterinary medicine?
Sure. I mean, so I've talked, a little bit about the implications for animals and the environment and human health. For carnism is a system of victimization, though it victimizes everybody. And so when we participate in harm that we don't really believe in, when we act against our integrity, when you support or participate in something that causes you to act against your integrity, your core values, you pay a price. You disconnect from the core of who you are. You live out of alignment with what most matters to you, with what you believe in. And it takes a lot of psychic energy, a lot of psychological energy to remain unaware of what is right in front of us and all around us. There's something very liberating when you allow yourself to open up your eyes to the reality of what is happening in the world to other beings, human and non-human beings who need your help, who need our help. And then you can choose to be an active participant in the creating the kind of world that we all really truly want to have for ourselves and for others. I should also explain that carnism is a sub-ideology of speciesism, sort of like anti-Semitism is a sub-ideology of racism. Speciesism is the ideology or belief system in which we place animals on a hierarchy of moral worth, perceiving humans, of course, putting humans at the top of that moral hierarchy, and treating animals with less respect, less compassion based on where they fall on that hierarchy. So whatever I'm talking about with carnism actually applies beyond. It applies to speciesism as well. There are other ways that we objectify animals, such as, through experimenting on them in speciesism, where we look at animals as objects, for instance.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for talking about this. Also, is really important. And then now I'm going to the other questions that you have here. How can we promote the idea of veterinary medicine that does not contribute to the system that subjugates non-human animals?
Well, I mean, this is a great question. I want to just say one quick thing, which is that, particularly in veterinary medicine, veterinarians and veterinary medicine in general, this is where people turn to for their ethical guidance on how to treat other animals. Veterinarians are ambassadors for animals in many ways. And when we are an ambassador for someone's well-being, when we are an ambassador for someone, we can be an ambassador for better or worse. So if you are working in the space of veterinary medicine, you are modeling, you are a role model. If you model through your choices, through your behaviors, that eating animals, that carnism, you can model that carnism is okay, that carnism is normal, natural, and necessary. Other people are going to follow your guidance more than they will somebody else, because you represent a field that represents animals and animals' needs. So it's really, really important to remember we are all a part of this system that is carnism, right? Our choice is not whether we participate in this system, but how we participate. If you are a veterinarian, you can use your influence to participate in a way that creates transformation, social transformation for animals, and even more broadly, because the same psychology that drives carnism and speciesism is the psychology that drives all oppressions, all oppressive systems. It drives patriarchy and racism and so on and so forth. So I think it's very, very important for people who want to change the field of veterinary medicine so it doesn't contribute to harm to animals in the way that it currently does, to promote awareness of carnism, awareness of speciesism, for example. Awareness reduces the power of defenses, of this sort of defensiveness to the conversation. Awareness helps free people's minds. It's also really important to create community, start a network. I don't know, there used to be in the US an organization called Veterinarians for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, like PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. I don't think they exist anymore. I have so many veterinarians reach out to me and say, I want to help create a better world for animals. I want to help stop the atrocity, but I feel like I'm all alone. We need an organization, you know, just like doctors have created organizations, medical doctors, I'm sorry, have created organizations to help promote non-carnistic medicine and nutrition. So I don't know if you guys have an organization in Brazil, but I think we do need an organization and an international organization to bring everybody together into this community to promote awareness and to work to change legislation and make it easier for people who go into veterinary school to not be forced to participate in practices they don't believe in, and to actually have to learn about carnism and speciesism as part of their training.
It's so important that you brought up, because we started, I'm a co-founder of organizations that are vegan and vegetarians, veterinarians. And then you have we have a lot of people, and then of course, but it's probably not so many, as we have like 400 veterinary schools in Brazil, more than
wow,
10 times more than US. And
incredible.
It's incredible. You have, but for example, some people reach out, but it's so few. If you think about the larger, the other ones, and of course you have expressive numbers of vegans and vegetarians, veterinarians. However, you have the massive number is non-vegan, and yeah, it's very interesting that you said that.
I mean, and one way to think about this is I don't know that the community of veterinarians, this network, in my mind, it's actually an organization that becomes the leading organization, you know, like what Greenpeace did for the environment back in the day. This is what we need, right? I don't think that the veterinarians themselves have to be vegan to be a part of the organization. And I don't even know if veganism needs to be part of the name, but rather, you know, veterinarians who are working for the ethical treatment of animals. And this could, you know, include a broad range of issues, and it might make it easier for people to feel like, so veterinarians who might believe in veganism, but not be totally vegan themselves, might not be willing to join the organization. So, because what you really need, and I love what you're doing, by the way, I'm so grateful to hear that you've already started to organize this network. It's so important. We need to get people involved, as many people involved as possible who really believe in the cause.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, we were thinking about the name for so long, and yeah, it's very interesting that you brought up. I think we need more organizations like this, and then yeah, you embrace all people, and then you learn with you, to be honest, to have a better approach. And then some of our veterinarians went to a seminar that you gave in Brazil.
About, great.
To outreach, and then we learned so much. Unfortunately, I was in San Diego, I could not attend, and then some of us attended, and then you used some of your I had the book too, and then you used some of your recommendations, and then to be honest, all your recommendations very helpful for us to reach out to more people. Yeah, and then. And before you finish, because our time is going so fast, I would like to, I forgot one important question. How all this process and psyche numbing of veterinarians affect people and other animals who receive veterinary services?
Yeah, I mean, so it's sort of like what I said before. You know, it's the mentality that drives all forms of oppression or exploitation, however we want to put this. It is the same. So when we think about, when we support carnism, when we support speciesism, we're reinforcing the very mentality that is creating and at the core of most of the most serious problems in the world. And so, as I said earlier, also, it may not be obvious, like it may not be obvious to a veterinarian, for example, how their own carnistic mentality is affecting them. But there is this disconnect that we live with as people, and especially with veterinarians who are really people who care about animals and who are doing a lot of good for animals. Most veterinarians, I mean, you're saving animals' lives all the time. It's such an important field to be in, and there's so much good that's happening. And when there's another part of you that's enabling something that is so counter to what you believe in, this takes away your ability to be as self-connected as you normally could be. And there's something, I was always a person who cared about animals. And after I kind of woke up to the reality of carnism and decided that I wanted to help transform this system, I wanted to end this system, it was very liberating for me. And I didn't realize how exhausting it had been before as a person who was around animals a lot and cared about animals a lot, but was like eating them all the time and not really doing as much as I could to help them. So I think that that's really important to keep in mind. And I do want to say, for many people, no matter how much you care about animals, it can be very challenging for people to just become vegan and stop eating animals for lots of reasons. So don't think that you have to be totally vegan yourself in order to help this cause. If you're a veterinarian, especially, helping to raise awareness about carnism, helping to encourage people to move toward alternatives, doing your best to just be as vegan as possible, whatever that means for you, that's really important. What we need is for you to be an ambassador, for you to be an awareness raiser, for you to be an ally, for you to be an active participant in helping people wake up to what's going on in the world and encouraging people to want to change this. Even if you're not totally vegan yourself, you can still do this and make a huge difference.
Thank you so much again. And that's like, wow. Okay, I know that Guilherme is here. I don't know if you can see him. I asked him. Guilherme is the one that the organizers. He is a master student of the University Federal of Uberlândia, UFU. And then, yeah, thanks to him and Bruna is not here, unfortunately, that this course is happening. And then it's so important for us to think about the importance of being an example. And then doesn't matter if you're totally vegan or not, it's so important. I think in US you have HSVMA, I think Humane Society of Veterinary Medical Association, that they do, they are very, they wanted to promote animal health, and they talk about several topics, very interesting. And of course they don't promote veganism, but I went to one of their meetings, and then the meetings, all the menu was vegan. And then I think it's great.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention that it can be really helpful for people who do want, to have resources to learn more. You guys doing this course is a great way to do that. We have at my organization, Beyond Carnism, if you come to carnism.org, we have a lot of resources on there. And we also run the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy. You do not have to be vegan to come, but we have online courses and we have online workshops and we have in-person trainings, and you can come if you want to help raise awareness. We help provide you with the tools to do this in a way that helps you to be as effective as possible in doing so.
Yeah, I think you talk about this in the lecture that you were in Brazil, that this helped so much. And then you learn a lot with all the lecture, and people took notes and then sent to me, and then I wrote an article about how to be effective in veterinary medicine. And then I think, just to wrap up, it's I'm going to get the two questions in one how can you promote animal activism in veterinary medicine? I think already mentioned before, but what recommendation you give to students and professionals in veterinary medicine who want to be activists for the animal cause?
Yeah, it would be the same thing that I said before, which is to find a group, a community, and join that community, join that group. And we need numbers. We need to do this together. So build your awareness of these issues, get informed. I know you guys have a lot of resources for people. They can come to my website to get other resources if they want, but build your awareness, connect with community. It's hard to do this alone, and we need to do this together, and learn, you know, promote awareness among others. So again, at carnism.org, we have a lot of just short videos, if you want, that you can forward to people if you want to quickly raise awareness, and books as well, you know, and build your own advocacy skills so that you can communicate about this issue. Because I'm sure you know this, as soon as we start talking about changing the way we relate to animals, many people become very defensive. This is what carnism causes them to do. So really understanding the situation and building the tools to communicate effectively can be life-changing for you and also for the animals.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for everything.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure, and good luck with everything.
Thank you so much, Melanie.
Okay.
Oh, hugs, and then thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.